Welcome to Inside AI, a podcast from the EPFL AI Center. I'm your host, Marcel Salaté, professor and co-director of the EPFL AI Center. Each episode brings you fascinating discussions with brilliant minds from EPFL and across the global AI community. From groundbreaking algorithms to ethical considerations, from technical innovations to real-world applications, we explore the technology that's transforming our world. Whether you're an AI researcher, industry professional, or simply curious about the technology that's shaping our future, join us as we venture inside AI. Today I'm speaking with Aldo Podestà, co-founder and CEO of Giotto.ai, a Swiss company focused on developing AI for advanced reasoning. Amazingly, Giotto recently hit the #1 spot on the ARC-AGI 2 leaderboard. This is an extremely challenging test of abstract problem solving that requires true intelligence. As you will hear, the amazing thing is that they did this with an AI model that is 3 to 4 orders of magnitudes smaller than leading AI models like Grok 4. It's super exciting to see that lean, efficient systems can compete with the biggest names. We not only talked about his journey and what they're doing with Giotto.ai at the moment, but also how he sees things going forward. I think Giotto.ai is an incredibly exciting development, and I was super happy to have Aldo as a guest. I hope you enjoy the conversation as well. All right, Aldo, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you're the CEO of Giotto, and I think it would be super helpful if people knew a bit more about who you are, what's your journey, what are you doing at Giotto, and then we can sort of deep dive from there.
Sure, fantastic. So I'm Italian, so I grew up in beautiful Rome in Italy and moved to Switzerland when I was 18, studying math at EPFL. Double check during the third year to launch the company, actually. So fancy story. It's not exactly a dropout, but is a double check. I mean, the Americans don't know that, but it's a very specific thing to the Swiss ecosystem. And before launching Giotto, I had the chance to work also in a multinational company called Philip Morris in Lausanne in the global sales strategy team when I was a quantitative analyst, if you want, so manipulating the first, early ideas in data science in collaboration with McKinsey on a couple of very interesting projects. And then I launched Giotto in 2017 together with my co-founders Wallison and Francesco. Initially working on a Kaggle competition, the three of us, which we won, by the way. And from that we said, maybe machine learning it is something. Maybe there is something around deep learning. Maybe there is something around topological data analysis. And so we started working more intensively, the three of us, on this fundamental research, and then we still pursue today. It has evolved a lot over the years, but that's the background about myself and how we started Giotto.
All right, interesting. So if I understand correctly, right, you started with a different name as the company.
Indeed. We started as L2F, which means learn to forecast. And then after we spun off part of the business in 2022, we decided to rename the business to Giotto. The reason being that initially L2F had a relatively broad scope, and we were thinking about doing several vertical applications using the same common technological stack, so transformers. Spoiler alert, then we can elaborate further on that later. And then we at a certain point in 2022, our first application became very successful. It was an application for medical device companies to automate their clinical evaluation process in the context of regulatory activities. It became very, very successful. And so we had the opportunity to spin off that part of the business, which we did. And then we said, okay, we don't necessarily want to go vertical every time. We like a lot the foundations here. Let's try to focus more on the foundations. And that's why we said, okay, let's rename the company as Giotto, which Giotto was, many people may know that, but Giotto was a painter, was the first artist to introduce the third dimension empirically. So was the first guy who was able to draw in 3D. This is what we wanted to do in machine learning. We want to add a third dimension to modern machine learning. And that's why we called the business Giotto at the end. We said, okay, we're not going to pursue this multi-vertical approach anymore because, it appeared to be successful, but the fundamental technology is even more successful. Let's focus on our DNA. And so we renamed the business to Giotto in 2022.
Okay. And so maybe let's briefly talk about this Kaggle competition.
Yeah.
So, right, because that I think will then also relate nicely to your current competition. So maybe, right, can you briefly explain what this was about and how this
Not the
works?
current one, the ARC-AGI. You mean the first one we won in
The
2017?
first one, yeah, just briefly so that people understand what is the setup, right, of a Kaggle competition and what the goal is. And if there's any details about that particular
Sure.
one that you want, that could also be interesting.
So it was all about predicting taxi trip duration in New York. So you were given a point of departure, an arrival, and a date of the day. And we had, a data set of several millions taxi trips in New York with all this information. It was relatively challenging for the toolkit that was available at the time. And we started exploiting a lot deep learning and feature engineering around deep learning because, we're not working with the big parameter spaces we work on today, they were relatively small models compared to what we work on today. And so feature engineering was very important. You had to pre-feed clean information to the model as much as possible. And so we had a very interesting approach on how to create very smart features for the deep learning model to learn. And it appeared to be very successful. And so this is where we started realizing, deep learning, it is powerful. Probably there is something even more that can evolve out of deep learning, and these appear to be transformers in late 2017. And then we also felt like, if we could extract more geometrical information out of data and clean somehow feature engineering through topological and geometrical methods, then probably this could help a lot as well. And this is why we started. We didn't win the competition using topological data analysis, but it inspired some work that then ended up to be a topological data analysis at the end. And so we started looking after the competition into persistent homology, Mapper, which is a graph-based algorithm to extract features from high-dimensional spaces. It can also be used as a dimension reduction technique if you want. And so we started looking more at this, in parallel, deep learning and topological data analysis. And this is really how we started and out of that competition.
But you started you went to this competition not as a company, but it incentive, so it sort of triggered you. Then your success triggered you to start a company. Am I getting this right, or what's?
So I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I think the three of us, we did an initial competition while being at EPFL, the three of us, the Data Mining Cup, and we got a very, very good score in the Data Mining Cup. It was a competition organized across universities, and we got top 10. First team not using a data leakage, because we discovered the data leakage and we were fair. Imagine the Italians being fair at a competition. We said, no, we're not going to use that. So we were the first team not using a data leakage in that competition. We said, okay, well, this is interesting. Let's launch a company. And while we launch a company, let's target a much bigger competition, something that is above universities or beyond the university ecosystem, something that is more global. And this is why we chose that Kaggle competition, because it was the most popular at the time in terms of number of participants. And so we started the incorporation process of the company while working on the Kaggle. And I guess that the company was officially incorporated the 6th of October 2017, right after the end of the Kaggle competition.
Okay. Well, I love this story. So you because it also shows you had real confidence, right, in your approach. And you're like, we're going to start a company with this, not knowing yet that you would win this competition.
And without having finished the studies, which was even more risky. So, we had a lot of confidence. I mean, we felt immediately that scaling deep learning could be something. When we started, training, we really started training deep learning models to solve, to win, or to participate into this competition. We felt, wow, you can solve stuff. And it really learns well. And somehow it also abstracts well. And so we were like, yeah, maybe it's the right time to bet big on this. And then the Attention is All You Need paper came out in late 2017. And so we're like, okay, this is really where this is going. If we can add attention layers on top of standard deep learning architectures, then maybe we can really scale into something different. And it was funny because it was the early days of OpenAI as well. So we're not alone in having that type of intuition. And so this is why we started. We believed in this a lot from day one.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, and you were super early, but it nevertheless seems then you chose a slightly different path in the sense of, you realize, okay, there's something there, but you obviously then didn't try to convince Microsoft to give you $500 million or however many it was at the time of OpenAI. But you said, if I understand that correctly, we can actually improve this algorithmically, right? With the topology here. It's not
Exactly.
just throwing a ton of compute at it, although that's going to help, but we can actually also just be smarter about it.
Exactly. So we thought like, so imagine, I think I was 24 at the time, first entrepreneurship experience, so no fundraising experience whatsoever. And it was difficult at the time to go out and say, transformers, they're the future of AI. We're gonna be raising hundreds of millions on that. It was in Europe impossible. I think the only one who managed to do it at that time was OpenAI in the US. So for us, it was difficult to go big on financing upfront. We still were able to raise some decent money, but it was difficult to go very big on the financing front. And so we're like, okay, let's try to choose a different path. We will not be able to scale data. Let's try to scale something else. At the beginning was feature engineering. Because if you have a very good feature engineering and you have automated way of doing feature engineering inspired by theoretical math, let's say, then you can do a lot and you can improve a lot the performance without having go through training monsters. Also because, it's very impressive what OpenAI did if you think what type of hardware was available at the time. It was also very difficult to imagine at that time with that type of GPUs to train what is possible to train now. So I think there were a mix of things that forced us to be smarter. And so we started looking at transformers and we started looking at topological data analysis. How do we use topological data analysis to improve the feature engineering? But also in general, we did a lot on also how to tune transformers. So I remember when BERT came out in 2018, we were immediately out there trying to tune it. How do we tune something that already exists? Because we were like, okay, so BERT is pre-trained. So someone already, Google specifically, invested money already in training some millions of parameters. So let's start from that. And so we gained a lot of expertise also in tuning transformers very early on. And so the two together were fascinating. And then obviously the transformer architecture is so powerful that when you learn how to tune it, we realized, okay, probably let's double down on that. But nobody knew anything about transformers at the time. It was really the early days. And so I was pitching to investors transformers. I was pitching to enterprises transformers, but people were like, what is this? And so with the co-founders, we said, okay, why don't we choose one vertical application where we automate an industrial process and we create value? So we create value. We deliver something with less resources, for example. And so completely crazily, we choose probably the most difficult industrial process out there, which is the clinical evaluation for regulatory purposes for medical devices, which is a fascinating process, though, because it's incredibly time consuming. So medical writers need to go through scientific literature to prove that a medical device is safe and effective, benchmarking it versus the clinical evidence that is produced internally by the company. And so it involves experts, so highly paid experts, and qualified experts that need to invest their time into reading scientific literature for thousands of hours. So for medical device companies, that was a very big expense. And even more interestingly, this is not a process where you can afford mistakes. And I think we had some very big lessons in 2019 around this that would still apply today. In clinical evaluation, the level of accuracy you need to reach in order to replace an expert is very high. It's not 90%. It's not 92%, which at the time, from a deep learning perspective, was really something. It was, you need to be 99.9% accurate when you extract a clinical endpoint out of a scientific publication. And so we decided to focus on that because we thought, okay, we're going to be proving that actually a transformer can create value, industrial value. And so we created this beautiful software that was doing something very basic, which was, reading a randomized clinical trial and extracting the clinical endpoints of that randomized clinical trial into MySQL. And so randomized clinical endpoints intended really very simply. How many patients have been enrolled in a study? How many females? How many males? What is the average age of those patients? Any complications? And so on. And so that software was really able to read in a very performant way a randomized clinical trial and translate clinical endpoints to MySQL, which ended up optimizing the process of writing a clinical evaluation report by initially a 15 to 20%. So actually, for a medical writer, as a support tool, not replacing completely a medical writer, but as a support tool, we were able to optimize the process by 20%. So run the same process 20% faster. But we learned very early on that it was not possible with that technology at the time to fully replace an expert. And so we're like, let's introduce this notion of human in the loop. How do we have an expert validating on the fly the behavior of an AI? This was 2019. It was very pioneering at the time. And it worked because we were like, okay, we're not going to be able to replace 100%, which is okay, but let's take this as a win. Let's replace 20%. And the 20% was enough because we started having many big names in the industry purchasing a license to the technology. But most important, we have the largest regulatory service provider in the field called ARC-AGI, which in 2022 knocked at the door and said, we write hundreds of clinical evaluation reports per year, and we're interested in your technology. And so then we decided to create a spin-off and sell it to them. So I would say that it was quite successful as an endeavor to prove, A, that transformers are worth something, and B, that you can leverage those type of architectures to optimize industrial processes.
So do I understand this correctly? You created a spin-off out of the company that you already had specifically for this vertical.
Exactly.
But that was 3 years after you had developed the technology.
Yes, I would say we started working on, we called it Giotto compliance in late 2019, and we sold it in 2022. So we developed it. So 1 year was pure R&D to make it work, and then we were in the market for a bit more than a year selling licenses, and then in 2022 we sold it.
Okay, nice. Good.
We had 20 customers. It was really something. It was approaching 1 million ARR. It was
nice.
A decent business. It was a very decent business.
So now I guess we have the challenge, or I want to put you to challenge, right, of explaining topological machine learning in a way that I can explain it to my neighbor. No offense to my neighbor, right? Smart people, but you know what I mean, right? To somebody who hasn't necessarily studied math at EPFL. So what is that? How does it work?
So disclaimer, we don't use that much anymore, not in the way it is intended in a classical way. We use graph-based algorithms still today for decoding, for example, for decoding out of a transformer, for decoding out of an LLM. We have a very unique technology that leverages graphs, multi-graphs actually. So let's say from a broad perspective, when we say topological data analysis, or when we say using geometrical and topological methods in machine learning, we tend to look at techniques that are able to extract geometrical structures from data. Okay, then you can use this in many different ways. You can use this, now most recently to decode out of an LLM. So to build the multi-graph of potential candidates, okay, that are a potential output to a given input to an LLM. Okay, so this is the most recent frontier way to use this type of approaches. But in the classical way, we were using techniques like mapper or persistent homology, whose, let's say, purpose is really to extract topological features out of the data. So let's call it geometrical features out of the data. And those features are supposed to be highly informative. So geometrical structure of data are supposed to be informative. Then whether this data is the data from which I learn, or whether this data is a parameter space of a model, the concept is the same. Geometrical information, geometrical signatures contain information, and you use information to enhance your learning. So this is in a nutshell, but as I said, there is a disclaimer. This research in our company evolved a lot. So we really started by looking in particular at persistent homology and mapper, and then this evolved into more dynamic graphs and multi-graphs. So to use dynamic graphs and multi-graphs at different levels.
So how do I have to imagine Giotto today? How much is R&D? You're doing your own R&D versus you're taking things off the shelf for open source models and you're productizing them.
So we are 100% R&D, and that was one of the fundamental decisions we made in 2022 after spinning off. So I had to make an effort to convince my shareholders to double down on the fundamental research rather than go productize again. And that's why also we changed the name to Giotto. And I'm a big believer of industrial research. So I think what universities do extremely well is planting seeds and make early ideas grow. But then in particular in AI, I think that there is a need for some project management around that to make this sort of intermediate research that is right above the university and right before a product. And I think there is a big need for that in AI. When you look at what OpenAI is doing, is exactly that. They took some ideas that came out from fundamental research, and they were able to set up an incredible project management around that was encompassing understanding of the hardware, of the data, of the deep learning technology behind, and putting this together. It's an effort that a university alone probably would struggle to do. It's really interdisciplinary. It requires a lot of project management skills, and it requires a lot of investments that are directed towards a single goal. And so I think very few companies do that in Europe. We know Mistral tried to do that, but they were forced to productization very early on. OpenAI was able to do that for years without any product pressure, let's say at least until 2022. And I think this is needed in this type of fields. Even in biotechnology, we're used to that. Look what's happening in Switzerland. We have this very strong biotech ecosystem where we know that we need to invest 5, 7, 9 years of R&D before going to the market. And that's industrial R&D, where, regulation goes together with clinical studies, and you prepare the market and you prepare the product for the market. I think AI is exactly the same. You need to do a lot of project management around research to prepare it for the market. And so this is what I'm a big believer in. And this is why I completely stopped any commercial activity since 2022 so that we could focus on the fundamental research and it's paying off. It's finally paying off.
So this is super interesting, right? Because first of all, I think this is the dream of many, right? To be able to go into a company, start a company, but continue to do research.
Yeah.
At the same time, right? It's a somewhat counter narrative to what we're often hearing, which is that, okay, of course you can do your own company, and then, if it's potentially successful, then that's great, right, commercially, but you are giving up, right, on this notion of doing research. And you saying basically, no, both are possible. So, which is fantastic. But how did you, as you say, I mean, this must be a hard sell to your investors, and so how did you pull that off, if you to the extent that you can share it, right?
It's a very good question. So first of all, I totally agree that the common narrative is different. The common narrative is, you need to satisfy the customer, go to the market, productize, which makes sense in many fields. In many products, it makes sense. But AI is different. AI is very different. And I take again the example of biotech. This is a fundamental effort that you need to make to prepare things for the market that you cannot do in 3 months. An LLM cannot be brought safely and effectively to the market in 3 months. It requires years of preparation to bring such a product in a stable and performant way, let alone regulatory ready, which I also think should be the case, to the market. So you need efforts, you need years. And I think we are used to that in the medical space. For biotech and medtech, we are used to that because there is a regulatory process to be respected, and because we realize that preparing a product for the market requires a very significant R&D effort that is out of the university. It's a project management almost effort. And in AI, people are start to understanding this now, thanks to OpenAI, because OpenAI has been working on fundamental R&D alone out of the market for 4 or 5 years. So the way I used the medical device and biotech parallelism. I said, guys, wait, I know this technology very well. I told you it helped me a lot. It helped me a lot that I said in 2018 to my investors, transformers are something. And then when I had to make that conversation about doubling down on the research, it was late 2022, right after ChatGPT came out. And so I was very credible because I was like, I told very early to my investors, transformers are something. Then GPT came out. And so I had a lot of credibility because I said 4 years before something happened that it would happen. And so I had somehow credibility, but it was still an hard sell. I had to fight a lot in a nice way because we have very, very good relationship with all the shareholders. But we had to have several meetings to convince them. But in the meantime, I started the research. So I started the research, and in the meantime, it took me probably 2 quarters, 4 or 5 board meetings to present why we would do that. We used the biotech, the biotech, and the medical parallelism, and we used a lot this deep understanding of transformers we had, which allowed us to be credible vis-a-vis our investors. And then obviously last year was incredibly tough because we were 2 years into the R&D investment, and we were just starting testing on the ARC-AGI, so we didn't have the validation we have today of the new reasoning technology. But when you do entrepreneurship, and I do this since 8 years, you know that there will be very difficult quarters, and there are quarters where you need to survive, where you need to accept the critics, accept the skepticism. But with the co-founders, we knew we were right about this reasoning thing and this choice we made in 2022, and we said, easy. And then OpenAI actually saved our ass again, because in last year, in December, they pull off this 12 days of OpenAI Christmas show. And in the last day, they presented their performance on the ARC-AGI. So the most important announcement they made was on the ARC-AGI. So we got lucky again, or good, because before that, our investors like, well, why did you choose the ARC-AGI? What is the ARC-AGI? It's not easy to understand what the ARC-AGI is and how important it is. So I'm like, why did you choose that? And then when they see Sam Altman in the office with the president of the ARC Foundation during the most important announcement of the Christmas show, they were once again like, okay, these guys, they know what they're doing. So last year, there was this Q3 was particularly a lot of pressure on us because the ARC-AGI wasn't as popular as we thought it would be. And then Q4, again, it spiked in visibility and here we are.
Yeah. So that's a great segue. So what is the ARC-AGI? I think we need to explain a bit more in detail what it is, what problem it's trying to solve, and then we can maybe dive a little deeper in where you stand there. So can you explain to people what the ARC-AGI is and why it was created in the first place?
So the ARC-AGI is a very particular benchmark that has been created to challenge a bit the state of the art and a couple of common, let's say, common problems that state of the art models have. In particular, transformer-based architectures and LLMs. The thing that comes to my mind and that I always say all the time is that in the ARC-AGI, you need to get every single pixel right. So when you predict an answer to a question, and I will explain what it is again, and then we go back to this pixel thing, but you need to predict 900 pixels or 300 pixels or 500. All of them needs to be perfect. And this is extremely difficult for a transformer-based architecture because they are probabilistic engines, they're stochastic engines. So they really try to work on the next most probable token thing. And so they for sure be wrong from time to time. And in language, you don't necessarily feel that a lot because if you get one word right out of 50, it's not a big issue. In ARC-AGI, a task is wrong. Now, it has been designed as an IQ test for the machine. So really trying to measure the ability of understanding logics that a model has never seen before. So it wants to challenge the memorization power of LLMs because one of the critics to LLMs is this thing, they memorize a lot. They don't necessarily think. And so what they try to challenge there is that. And then the stochastic nature of the LLM. So they work really as stochastic engines rather than thinkers. And so these IQ tests are really grids where a logic is displayed over a few examples. And then you have an input of a test pair, we call it, where you need to predict the output, showing that you have understood the logic. Now, the beauty is that these riddles are extremely complicated, even for humans. In my view, the organizer said they're easy for humans, difficult for machines. Some of them are also difficult for humans. But the idea is that, you really need to create and design a system that is capable of understanding a logic, an unseen logic, which is not easy at all. A logic that was not part of the training data. And in the competition we are part to, we don't know the logics we are tested on. We have never seen those logics. And so it really wants to measure the ability of a model or a system to understand logics it has never seen before, scenarios and context it has never seen before. And it challenges, as I said, the stochastic nature of these models, the memory heaviness of these models, so the fact that they rely mainly on memory rather than the real-time contextual understanding. But they also challenge a lot the context window and the attention span of these models, because you need to, when you see these things, you need to have a very long context span to solve a task. And so this is why we choose the ARC-AGI, because it challenges the state of the art. You don't necessarily go to AGI if you solve the ARC-AGI, in my view, but you go a big step forward in the scientific research if you do. And because it's independently tested on data you have never seen, on a server you don't control. Because one of the things I don't like at all in AI since 2022 is that everybody is putting, benchmark data in the training data, and then they test on the benchmark. So it doesn't work this way. You need to we can do better than that. So, and I like a lot the fact that there is such a credible and serious foundation behind. François Chollet is a very renowned scientist, founder of Keras, researcher at Google. Now he launched his own research lab in India. So behind the ARC-AGI, there is also a team in which we believe, and so makes the overall exercise very credible in my view.
So this is to sort of wrap this together a bit. If I understand correctly, this was essentially designed, as you say. I mean, there were all these weaknesses with the other benchmarks. That basically the argument you could make is that the models are not really intelligent in like our human definition, because they are not actually truly confronted with new challenges that they have never seen. And this is the one that sets this up in a way that by design these are truly new things that the model can never have seen before. And this now, importantly, we are at ARC-AGI 2, right? So so the first one has been solved, or what's the history there?
Yeah, the first one has been almost saturated, I would say. But I think because the organizers were a bit too kind. So the space of potential logics that you can display through grids is huge. Huge. It's bigger than the number that you can write in a machine. So you cannot really brute force the benchmark. You cannot just label data and train on that. In V1, they didn't exploit much that feature of the benchmark. So the training data were very similar to the test data. And so you could, by creating domain-specific language functions on the training data, you could somehow try to brute force the test data. Also, they were very kind on the size of the grids. And so they were not challenging that much the probabilistic, let's say, the stochastic nature of these models, nor the attention span of these models. Now, this year, the grids are on average way bigger. The logics are very different. So from the training set and the test set, they are very, very different. That's why day one, everybody was at 0. We were the only team at non-zero. We were the only team at 4% day one. Everybody else was at 0. Because you can't really use the training set as the weapon you use to solve the benchmark. You cannot solve the benchmark by labeling data, writing DSL functions. You need to find something different. And this is what makes V2 incredibly interesting. GPT-5 goes 9.9% accuracy on the test data of ARC-V2, whereas on V1, I think they were going above 80% with the Aero 3 model. So this V2 is extremely challenging even for this for these frontier models. Grok 4, which is the most performant model on the ARC-AGI, let's say public big model on the ARC-AGI or system, they go at 15.9% or 16%. So, but really very, very limited performance when you think what was possible in V1. So it means that they solved 16 tasks out of 100. Mm-hmm. So actually now the test set is 240, but they solve 16% of the total test tasks.
And you are number one, right? And you are at how many percent now?
We are at 23.19% with a 200 million parameter system. So it's a very, very relatively small system, let's say.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing.
When you think that the Grok is 1.7 trillion. Yeah. So it's obviously a different scale.
Oh, this is incredible. So how do you explain that? I mean, I it's not that it needs an explanation. It's your model, right? And it performs but nevertheless, right, when you put it like this, it is astounding, right? It's like, okay, not only are you performing so well, but you're doing this with a sort of true David versus Goliath kind of situation, not only financially, but also actually, right, the size of the model. I mean, your model is not even 1 billion parameters. I mean, it's 3 orders of magnitude. It seems smaller or more, right? We actually don't quite know how large the biggest models truly are.
Exactly.
And yet you beat them, right? This, in this world where everything is so like hyper competitive in the space of AI, in principle, right, this shouldn't be possible. So what are you doing? And obviously, right, I'm not challenging you that it's not possible, because this is
amazing
benchmark, right? So it is definitely possible. So what is going on here? Like how can that be explained?
So it is an incredible result. It's really impressive, and I think there are a couple of breakthroughs that we made this year to achieve that result that will be used in machine learning in the coming years are standards. They will become the new state of the art for certain things. I would say we try to focus, so many things. First of all, we have a lot of experience with transformers. So we know how to train transformers for real. We don't just tune stuff. So we know how these architectures work very well. And so this was helpful, because as a team, we have several people that know how to manipulate those objects since a long time. And so these help a lot, because you need to build around transformers. Now it's became a system. It's not a model anymore. Then we tried to train better, but also going into test time compute in a different way. And I think so there are multiple keys. I will not disclose everything, but let's say test time compute, it's a large concept. I like a lot the notion of test time training. In test time training, you can really get rid of many parameters if you have an external memory that supports the model. So the current paradigm of GPT-5 or Grok is, I try to make it simple, but I try to memorize everything. The word knowledge up front. Do you need to do that? If you can have a white box external memory, Actually, the transformer is very powerful are generating tokens or generating language. So it's actually, when you look at the brain, and then I'm not a neuroscientist, so I don't want to say anything stupid, but it's like you have a couple of areas in the brain that are really related to the understanding and generation of language. The Broca's areas, the Wernicke's areas. Okay, so these areas are really in charge of understanding and generating language, really moving the muscles. In my view, the transformers should have that role. So they don't, for example, encode memory. They don't memorize stuff, this part of the brains. And I don't think we should have a transformer memorizing everything. Okay, so I think that is way more interesting having a transformer consulting an external memory on the fly based on an input. So I receive an input, I look in an external memory what is relevant for my input, and then I process it through the parameters of the transformers. This is, in my view, a fundamental philosophical thing that allows you to move from a very big parameter space to a very small one, or a relatively small one, because 200 million is still something. And you actually don't need to memorize everything up front. You can overfit of an input looking at an external memory in real time. And I think this is something that you learn in the ARC-AGI. You need to live. You need to understand context. You need to be operating in real time. And this is, I don't like the term AGI, but let's say next wave of intelligence will probably be, and we see it with agents, by the way. Next wave of intelligence will be around real-time understanding, real-time living of these informatical objects. And so I think test time training is one of the reasons for which you can go way, way smaller, because you externalize the memory. You don't put it all in the parameters of the model up front. And this is a trick that you can use to be very, very efficient. Then, obviously, we do test time training very well. So because other teams do test time training, we learned test time training is something that came out last year.
Yeah, can you explain that a little bit more, because that seems to be that seems to be confusing on the face of it, right? At test time, obviously you have trained, you are now testing. Exactly. So what is test time training?
So in test time training, you retrain a model in real time. So you receive an input and you retrain the model on training data that you select at test time very quickly, very efficiently. You need to leverage techniques like LoRa, for example. So where you take a matrix and you perturbate, let's say, the main parameters of the model using a matrix, so that you just go and perturb a subset of the parameters, let's say. But it still allows you to calibrate the model very efficiently. So you go and manipulate a subset of the parameters, but you do it in real time and you do it very efficiently. So you can use techniques like LoRa to train very, very fast the model again on a subset of the training data that is relevant for your input. Now, let's take a non-ARC example. When we talk about, something funny, football. Okay, we talk about Inter Milan winning the league or not winning the league against Naples and so on. You don't need to have in your memory knowledge about implants, medical device implants. You don't. You need to have a common base language thing, some sort of basis. But to be an expert about Serie A in Italy, you don't need to be an expert of implants. It's the same. Now, in the ARC-AGI, when you get a given task, you don't need to memorize all possible space of logics. You need to have some fundamental logics that you can consult, that you identify being similar to that logic, and recalibrate your model only on those. And so this allows you to be very efficient, because you go and look in your memory just what you need for that given conversation. So when you talk about Serie A, for example, you go and check your memory about the games you have watched. When you go and talk about implants, you go and refresh your mind about all the randomized clinical trials you've read about, knee implants. One doesn't need the other, they're two knowledge that are very far away from each other. And so retraining a model in real time just on the knowledge you need for a given input, in my view, is something very interesting. And in general, it will move into the direction for which memories will be externalized out of the transformers, which is needed. Otherwise, we will always have situations in which models hallucinate. So you have too many parameters, too much knowledge incorporated in a black box way, because it is black box at the end, into trillions of parameters. If all of a sudden you can learn from a white box memory in real time, you can reduce also hallucinations. You can control your memory, what you need for what, and you can clean it. You also know very well what part of your memory is producing an hallucination, for example, and then you can clean your memory instead of I need to go and change the overall huge training data that I have, almost blindsided, and retrain the monster spending billions. This is what is happening today, by the way, just for the world knowledge. When they go and want to correct the behavior of these monsters, they need to retrain all of them or part of them, which is a very expensive endeavor.
Yeah.
So with this, you correct the memory, you don't retrain the model, which is way, way cheaper. Actually, it's incredibly cheap.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. So, I mean, so that is it a lot slower though? I mean, is there a trade-off because you're also training at test time?
So you need to, very good question. So couple of things. First of all, you decide your own reasoning budget. Now, when you go and look at popular products, they do the same. They say, how much chain of thoughts classification do I do before I provide an answer? They produce chain of thoughts. They produce this sequence of tokens. They reward. This is what is happening. They reward each of them, and until the reward is high enough, they don't provide an answer. They keep generating. Okay, this is more or less, it's an oversimplification, but it's more or less what is happening. Okay, so and sometimes it takes a lot. When you have GPT-5 thinking, I don't know if you have tried it, it still thinks quite decently. Okay, so you need to go and reward. It takes time. Now here you don't do that. You go and you retrain your model. Now you can decide how much budget do I have to think. If I have to think very fast, for example, I can control how much memory do I use to retrain, and I can control the size of the LoRa metrics I use to retrain the model. I can go with a very small metric. Now, if I have a lot of time to think, I can even not use LoRa. I can retrain in full the model, and I can use... So doesn't work exactly this way, because to retrain in full the model, you also need to have enough data, but it's just to give a sense of... So you can do the optimal training, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that you understand with transformers, you need the right amount of things for the right parameter set for a given amount of parameters, for a given amount of parameters. So you can set budget, but in the ARC-AGI on 4L4s, we can process 240 tasks in 12 hours. Which parentheses, our results are obtained on 4L4s in 12 hours. Grok and GPT-5 results are obtained on H200s or H100s, many of them, without time constraints. So it's not even apples to apples, if you want.
Yeah.
And I said that to the ARC Foundation, by the way, because I like them a lot, but, they make the life of the small labs even more difficult than what it already is. So, so 4L4s, 12 hours, you can process and think about 240 tasks.
Yeah, amazing. So what's the vision then for the company? I mean, to the extent that you can talk about, so you keep doing R&D, your investors are on board with that. Nonetheless, right, this cannot be on an infinite time scale, right? At some point, are you thinking about productizing this, or are you rather thinking about licensing the technology, or are you more gearing towards a big exit, or what's your vision there for Giotto?
So I raised a bit more funding this year. So we have another couple of years of runway now. So we can continue a bit our research with the current team and the current computing resources. But so I would say that we have two options in front of us, to be very transparent. One is that we join forces with a bigger lab, because what we are building, if you install it on some of these models, they will boost the performance of these things. Because we just mentioned test and training, but we do a lot of research in program synthesis or in decoding techniques, for example, that is also very relevant for some of these very big labs. So one option will be for us to join forces with one of these labs, and the other option is to launch an alternative to ChatGPT, a Swiss alternative to ChatGPT, smarter, faster, cheaper, and better. But we will need to enter a different league of financing. So now I think we have raised around 15 million so far. We will need to enter at least the order of the hundreds. Okay, because the hardware component to serve at inference, let alone let's imagine we are very efficient at training and we move the burden a bit more on test time. We still need to serve very efficiently users. So you need hardware. You need to be able to deploy hardware. So, and that is expensive. So I would say these are the two options. So option one, again, join forces with someone bigger, and option two is launching our own ChatGPT product for the public, faster, cheaper, smarter, right, obviously, and better. But for that, we need to find some financing in probably Europe alone will not suffice. So we need to go probably Middle East and US and Europe. So trying to pull together resources from 3 continents. And I think it's feasible. I am having discussions around that, and I'm positive that this can happen now.
Finance is global, right? Anyways.
Yeah.
Can I put a word in for option 2? I really
Yes,
would love to see that not just being another exit to the usual ones, but in light of so many things, right? Of course you can make a geopolitical angle, though of course, right, you as a company, you have only secondary or even tertiary interests about that. I mean, you at the end of the day have to run a business, but it seems like it would also just be a much more, right, to sort of trigger your entrepreneurial DNA would be a much more exciting adventure now to try and launch that.
I'd love that. I love that, but I need to be realistic here. The competition is fierce. If we want to launch a product in the market, I've been thinking. I'll give you a bit of background about my business thoughts around this. So I've been thinking, let's launch something a bit more low level, probably just for enterprises or for developers. But you don't compete with the big ones if you do that. You really need to go with products that are easy to use. You need to go with an app, a chat, and an API, obviously for the developers community. So you want the developer community to develop, but you also want the masses to get rid of ChatGPT. So you want the Swiss to use a Swiss app or the Europeans to use a European app hosted in Europe, respecting European regulations. We can contribute to shape the European regulation, which are not perfect, but I think we need them. So they need to be improved. Let's contribute. And nothing is perfect day one. I come from I have this experience in the regulatory space of medical devices. So I tend to like regulations if they are well designed. So UMDR is an example of another regulation that can be improved. But the AI regulation, the UAI Act, can be improved. So it's just about contributing. If you just, oh no, it's horrible. We don't. No, let's discuss how to make it better. No. So I would love to do that. I would love to launch a product that is Swiss and European for the European community and I would say the masses. Because my grandmother uses ChatGPT. I love it. My mother uses ChatGPT. It's incredible. I'd love them to use a different product now. Just because we work in the field. So I think the path for us, if we have to move forward, let's say alone, is to launch a popular product, a product that can really be used by the masses, I would say. And if we do that, but to do that, Marcel, you need to have the resources. We don't need billions. We don't need billions, but we will need something in the order of the few hundreds of millions to do something meaningful. Because these guys, they're running. They're slowing down. They're going to a sort of a bottleneck somewhere in their research, but their products are impressive. I'm impressed by Grok 4, GPT-5, the thinking version of GPT-5. They're not perfect. They do mistakes. They do hallucinations. They have hallucinations. But in 2017, would you imagine that happening so soon? I was
exactly.
working.
But I think that's exactly why it's exciting, right? Of course, it will be hard to catch up with GPT and so on. But at the same time, right? Whatever it is, I mean, it's kind of still. I mean, you hear this expressed in different ways, right? Some people say it's still day zero, right, of AI development. Another thing that I heard the other day, which I really liked, is like we're still in the MS-DOS area, right, of AI, and it's true. And so you feel like, okay, right, so some people have an advantage, but I mean, as you're demonstrating, this game is just starting, right, and you are just beating the top models with an architecture that is orders of magnitude smaller. So I mean, I think there's still very early days, and just to pick up on something you said, I think you said it's have to be realistic, right? I think are the words that you said. And I think that's obviously very good as an entrepreneur. But then, right, in many ways, when I listen to the story of Giotto and everything you've done before, you often took a jump, right, where you said, where your definition of what realistic means was actually years ahead, right, of what everybody was thinking. So you seem to just have everything, right. You and your team seem to have all the right attitudes, basically, to tackle this.
Yeah, it's just that, we started being a company with many shareholders that took risk. And at a certain point, they will want a reward. And so the financing path must also include that component of a reward for them. And so, which makes it difficult. So I need to acknowledge that. And I love to do that. I'm working on doing that day and night. I'm really exploring that path very, very seriously. I will disclose probably something in September, but I'm exploring that path very, very seriously. And I will have to evaluate both. But I'll try to make this financing path also sexy, let's call it.
Yeah, sure.
And if you want, I want to say something because you mentioned we've been years ahead many times on stuff, and I think it's true. Now I think that a key to launch, just if it's not for us, it's going to be for someone else. But a key now to launch a product that is competitive with ChatGPT is changing the architecture behind. And I see two macro things that can be changed. One is this paradigm for which we try to shift more on test time training. And the second is program synthesis. Program synthesis is not training on code. Okay, I think, and when you see, for example, GPT-5 thinking or these other guys that produce code in Python, for example, to validate mathematical reasoning. Program synthesis is way more subtle than that. And if you can crack program synthesis in a more generic way than being bounded by a single program, so programming language, you can really go into a different level of validating candidate outputs in a quantitative way. So today, what we do is we train very big models in a reinforcement learning fashion. We produce candidate outputs using chain of thoughts. We reward them with an external reward system. And then for the quantitative questions, we have an external code generation model that generates let's say Python code. In some cases, it's some other language, but let's say Python code that writes up the solution to that mathematical question. Now, this is the way it's done today. My feeling is that we could go in a direction where everything is test time trained, and program synthesis is not programming language specific, it's generic. If you do that, you really do a big step towards a different type of intelligence. So I would pursue that path if I were to continue this journey alone.
Oh, that sounds super exciting. So I'm sure you're super busy, so I want to be mindful of your time. So maybe just to wrap up a little bit, a few broader questions. Now you have this pole position in, developing AI at a pace that's incredible, and you're succeeding at a scale that is absolutely fantastic. So how do you look at sort of the more, I would say, general discussions around this, right? You mentioned François Chollet, right? And so there's some thinking around, okay, what does it actually mean, right? If that kind of intelligence that, for example, the ARC-AGI captures, which we consider to be, at least in some certain sense, true human intelligence, can eventually demonstrably achieved, right, by a network of artificial neurons, and as it may turn out, it may not even be that large, right? So how do you think about the implications? I mean, I assume in general, as an entrepreneur, you're pretty optimistic about what that could unleash into the world. I mean, caveat, I am, right? Everybody's listening to this podcast knows that I am. But I'm curious how you think about it, being very close to the actual cutting edge development of this potentially next generation of models.
So I think we can do much more still around transformers and program synthesis. So we can unleash and unlock more potential, more intelligent systems compared to what we have today by let's say, continuing our research work around those areas. And we're not done. Absolutely not done. I think we need to think creatively. We need to look at different ways. I mentioned my vision about program synthesis, for example. But so I think that we're not done yet with what we already have. I think there is much more that can be exploited. Secondly, there will be a bottleneck at a certain point, which will be bounded by the hardware. So what type of hardware we use, how this hardware work. And I hope that we will have much more competition in the hardware space so that we can evolve that field as well. I see now it's dominated by NVIDIA. AMD is trying to catch up, and we see Grok with the former product owner of the TPUs from Google, trying to develop these accelerated inference engines. But I think we'll need much more than that to build general intelligence. We think it will have to go through the hardware, and I think this is going to be a very fascinating field of research in the years to come that will have to become richer, will have to become itself biologically inspired. So I think that there is only that much you can do around the current wave of technology at the software level, let's call it. And I think that there is still more potential. We are not done yet there, but at a certain point we will need way more competition at the hardware level as well to innovate fundamentally there, because I feel there is a lot of potential.
Amazing. And so you've been an EPFL student not too long ago. I mean, it's not exactly yesterday, but it's also not 20 years ago. So what would you, I mean, so the current crop of students, right, they're looking at this field, they're excited about what happens, but it's also super confusing because things are changing so fast. What would you recommend they do in general?
So first of all, study well at EPFL because every person. So when I'm hiring PhDs from the EPFL or ETH, in general, I get incredibly strong individuals. You don't find that those type of individuals anywhere else. So they come, they're competent, they are ready to work hard, they have hands-on experience, so they already know how to code, for example. So I think that exploiting at maximum the DPFL experience is critical because you get both this hands-on experience, so people get out that they know how to code well, but also they have very good theoretical 360-degree, let's say, knowledge, which is needed to do research. So I like a lot. I try to hire as much as possible from EPFL and ETH because the people are out that go through those curriculum, let's say, are incredibly strong. So I think doing the studies well, which I didn't fully, is honestly something very important. And I wish I did more actually. And secondly, there is so much. I mean, the space is so big. Myself, if I had to start from scratch, I would look a lot at program synthesis, which I find extremely fascinating, and then I would look a lot at the hardware. So, for example, there is this new architecture now, the B200 and B300, which are completely different compared to the season, the H100 season, are incredibly interesting. They are all about trying to optimize how we train on float 16, which I don't necessarily agree from what I'm seeing on the ARC-AGI, by the way, but that path is interesting. And why do we need to work on the type of number representation? I would study a lot the number representation at the hardware level and how this is changing and why are we moving to different representation. I think this is something very, very interesting to study. And I think that will be there. Talent is now attracted a lot by the software side and the machine learning research side of it, but there is as much and even more on the hardware side. And so I would recommend also develop expertise at understanding the latest hardware architectures, how they work, why they are designing that way, I think that there is probably more potential to develop there than in strict AI machine learning engineering. If you develop deep fundamental experience on how this hardware behaves and how they are evolved, but I was saying, I would look more at the let's say building my knowledge at the hardware level and not only at the software at the software level, because I think that there is a lot of research coming in that direction.
Yeah, I guess yeah, that is super interesting. And of course, also, if you look at the brain, I mean, there's obviously a lot of hardware there, and it's in the learning, and the intelligence itself is also encoded in the hardware and not just the software. So I think there's still a ton of things that are completely undiscovered there. I guess software is interesting because it doesn't take a lot, in quotes, right, to get started, whereas hardware is, as the word implies, for different reasons, harder. But I would agree with you that this is a super exciting area. Good. So if people want to find out more about Giotto, about you, about ARC-AGI, where should they go?
So they can go on our website, Giotto.ai, but they can also go on the ARC Foundation website. So they can type on Google ARC Foundation and they will find plenty of nice material there. They can even there's a playground where they can play around with ARC tasks. So it's an excellent place to start.
By the way, I wanted to ask you just briefly, how does this actually practically work? So I mean, the ARC Foundation obviously cannot release the test sets because they're in principle easy to solve for humans. So how does that work? You have to submit your model, or there's sort of an API playground, or how does that actually work? How is your system evaluated?
So you ship your system through Kaggle, and it's run automatically on Kaggle on the data. So actually you ship the code, the inference code via Kaggle on Kaggle instances, and it's tested on Kaggle instances. But the big models, they do the opposite. They get the data nicely shipped via their API. They test on that on their beautiful premises, and they send the results.
That's why you were saying they make life harder for you as a small.
Exactly. They make life very, very hard for the small labs.
Good. Well, Aldo, thanks so much. This was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you for inviting
We
me.
hope to see you around. And yeah, we'll just point people to the various resources that you mentioned. ARC Foundation, ARC, is certainly also good to check out. We'll also link to the Giotto website. So thanks and good luck. Continued. I mean, it doesn't look like you need luck, though. It probably never hurts either. It's really amazing what you've been doing there.
Thank you so much, Marcel. And thank you for inviting me. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye bye.